Ma'am, you need to leave. Now. The officer's voice cut through the heavy silence of courtroom 3B, sharp and commanding. Every head in the room turned toward the source of the disturbance. In the center of the room stood a woman, tall and resolute, clutching a thick folder of legal documents. Her name was Danielle Rivers, and she had no intention of moving. "I have the right to be here," Danielle said, her tone steady despite the tension vibrating through her. The murmurs among the spectators grew louder. People exchanged glances, some curious, others concerned. Judge Leonard Prescott's gavel came down hard on the bench. "Not anymore," he said curtly. "Bailiff, remove her." Deputy Sergeant Nathan Calloway stepped forward, his boots heavy against the polished wood floor. He was a large man, built like a linebacker, with sharp blue eyes and a presence that made people sit up straighter. Danielle held her ground as he approached, ready to be dragged out if it came to that. But before his hand could touch her shoulder, the double doors at the rear of the courtroom flew open with a crash. A court clerk, young, breathless, and pale, rushed toward the bench, waving a folded sheet of paper. "Your Honor," the clerk called out, his voice quivering. "There's a call from the White House." The courtroom froze. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, Judge Prescott stared in disbelief. Then, slowly, he reached for the note and read the hurried scrawl. His brow furrowed, his jaw clenched. Danielle's heart pounded. She had no idea what was on that piece of paper, but she sensed in her bones that everything was about to change. Harmony County Courthouse, Tuesday morning. The Harmony County Courthouse, situated in a quiet suburb of Maryland, was an imposing structure of stone columns, grand archways, and wide marble steps. The American flag fluttered above the entrance as a steady stream of people filed inside. Metal detectors beeped steadily at the entrance as security officers checked bags and IDs with practiced efficiency. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with anxiety. Lawyers in rumpled suits dashed between courtrooms, clutching folders and laptops. Families sat on wooden benches, whispering prayers or sobbing quietly. Clerks hurried past with armloads of files. Even the polished mahogany walls and brass fixtures seemed to absorb the tension of the day. Danielle Rivers stood among them, her posture straight, her expression calm but wary. At 42, she had weathered more battles than she cared to count. She wore a tailored black suit over a crisp white blouse, her dark braids pinned neatly at the back of her head. In her arms, she carried a file that represented years of effort, stress, and hope. This was her case, a discrimination lawsuit against her former employer, Wallace v. Wyatt Marketing Group. Her attorney, Jack Lawrence, had been optimistic about their chances. Jack was in his early 50s, a seasoned civil rights lawyer who had earned a reputation for challenging corporate giants. He believed in Danielle's case. He believed the evidence was strong. Emails, performance reviews, client testimonials. All of it painted a clear picture of systemic racism and bias. But none of that seemed to matter inside this courtroom. Not yet. The hearing begins. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Judge Leonard Prescott took his place at the bench in room 3B. Prescott was known for his no-nonsense demeanor and rigid control of his courtroom. His sentences were swift, his rulings rarely challenged. Danielle's case was first on the docket. She sat quietly beside Jack, trying to steel herself as Prescott read through the initial motions. Across from them, Wallace v. Wyatt's lead counsel, Charles Denton, smirked as he shuffled through his notes. Denton was the picture of corporate arrogance, slicked back hair, a suit that cost more than Danielle's monthly rent, and a smugness that practically dripped from his every word. The early stages of the hearing followed the expected pattern. Jack presented Danielle's history with the company. 6 years of stellar performance, glowing client reviews, and clear documentation that she had been consistently passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified colleagues. Denton countered with accusations that Danielle had been combative, disruptive, and unsuited for leadership. As the hearing stretched into its third hour, Danielle asked permission to introduce additional evidence. New emails that had come to light only days earlier. Emails that explicitly referenced her as not a good cultural fit and too urban for certain clients. Judge Prescott's expression turned sour. Ms. Rivers, we've already spent considerable time on your testimony, he said curtly. You've made your point. With respect, Your Honor, Danielle pressed. These emails were deliberately withheld by the defense. They're critical. Prescott's patience snapped. That's enough, Ms. Rivers. One more outburst, and I'll have you removed. And just like that, Danielle's world tilted. The confrontation. Deputy Sergeant Calloway stepped forward, his hand hovering near his belt where a pair of handcuffs gleamed ominously. Jack Lawrence stood quickly, trying to intervene, but Prescott slammed his gavel down once again. Remove her. Calloway advanced on Danielle. Ma'am, he said, his voice low and firm, you need to leave. Danielle's heart pounded, but she refused to let fear show. She gathered her files with trembling hands, aware of the eyes watching her. Some were filled with pity, others with cold satisfaction. As Calloway reached for her arm, the courtroom doors burst open. The call from the White House. The young clerk stumbled into the room, waving a piece of paper. Your Honor, you need to take this now. Prescott snatched the note from the clerk's hand and read it quickly. His eyes widened, then narrowed. He turned to Calloway. Stand down. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. We're taking a recess, Prescott announced abruptly. All parties remain in the building. The murmur that followed was electric. Jack leaned toward Danielle. What the hell just happened? I don't know, she whispered, but something just shifted. Behind closed doors. In his chambers, Judge Prescott picked up the phone, his hand shaking slightly as he dialed a number. He spoke quietly, deferentially, to the person on the other end. Yes, Mr. Secretary. I understand. Yes, I'll see to it. When he hung up, he looked at Deputy Calloway. Find Ms. Rivers. Bring her back. Now. Calloway blinked. Sir, that was the White House, Prescott said grimly. The Department of Justice is watching this case. They want her testimony. Make sure she's treated with respect. Calloway found Danielle near the courthouse exit. She looked at him warily as he approached. You're requested back in the courtroom, he said, his tone different now. More respectful, almost apologetic. Danielle hesitated. What? Calloway shook his head. I don't know, but the judge wants you back. She followed him without a word, her pulse racing. Jack met them at the door, relief flooding his features. The turning point. When Danielle re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. Prescott's tone was measured, his demeanor almost courteous. Ms. Rivers, he said, please take your seat. Jack introduced the new evidence, and this time, Prescott listened. The emails, projected on large screens, left no room for doubt. Racist language, coded but clear, filled the messages. Deliberate discrimination, concealed behind corporate jargon, was laid bare. The defense tried to object, but Prescott overruled them. Danielle delivered her closing statement, her voice steady but emotional. This isn't just about me, she said. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong. About every employee who's been silenced. When she finished, there was silence in the courtroom. Aftermath and justice. The judge recessed to consider his ruling. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse. Word had spread. There had been a call from the White House, and everything had changed. Within days, Wallace Val Wyatt offered a settlement that included a public apology, policy reforms, and a substantial financial award. The Department of Justice opened an investigation into the company's hiring practices. Danielle Rivers became a symbol of courage and persistence. She was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed on national television, and asked to consult on diversity reforms for major corporations. Deputy Calloway transferred to community outreach, determined to change his approach to law enforcement. And in Washington, officials reviewed policies to ensure that cases like Danielle's received the attention they deserved. Conclusion. Danielle stood on the courthouse steps, watching the crowd. She thought back to the moment she had nearly been silenced, and how close she had come to losing everything. But justice had found a way. Sometimes it takes one voice to spark change, and sometimes that voice echoes all the way to the White House.